Hello and welcome to another short video from the Activism, Influencing and Change programme at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Today we're going to introduce public, or what might be called outsider tactics. We're going to begin by looking at the broad range of tactics that this category encompasses. We're then going to look at why it's so important that you are really clear about the objectives of each tactic when you're designing them, and why knowing your audience is vital to ensuring you have impact. Lastly, we're going to briefly explore some of the common public or outsider tactics that take place in the public sphere, but not necessarily using online or digital means, what we might want to call analog tactics. Before exploring public or outsider tactics in detail, just a quick recap of a point we've made before. We'd argue that most influencing strategies are going to be a mixture or a series of linked tactics, usually both public and outsider and private or insider tactics. The exact balance between that mix is going to be completely contingent upon the nature of the complex system activists are trying to, or working in rather, and the wicked problems that they're trying to address. You can't know this really before doing your analysis and really get into the grips with that complex system and the factors that are sustaining or enabling the problems you want to work upon. Public and outsider tactics are used, however, generally when we want to engage large numbers of people or organisations or members of an entire institution at once. They are generally also used to raise awareness or change the way an issue is seen by those people, and sometimes are used to challenge or change social or moral norms that we think are debilitating for some reason or another. That said, outside or public tactics, which always take place in the public sphere and are generally visible to those large numbers of people or members of the public, they can also be used to put pressure on those closed or invited spaces where activists might have an opportunity to engage power holders. In this sense, we can think of public or outsider tactics as helping us to create an enabling environment for our private or insider tactics, or generally putting pressure on places that we might not even be able to reach as activists, where hidden power is making decisions that are important to our ability to address the problems we want to change. Also, a quick note before we go further, that we acknowledge that it's increasingly irrelevant or nonsensical to talk about a difference between our on and offline lives and tactics, and that the digital sphere is increasingly shaping all facets of our life. However, for the purpose of this video, we'll mainly be talking about analog tactics, tactics that don't use digital platforms or aren't digitally mediated. There's a great range of tactics which fall under the category of public or outsider. Pretty much anything an activist might do to change the balance of power in the public sphere counts. For example, at one end we have the things that we all recognise as activism, protest, civil disobedience, engaging a policymaker on a public platform, maybe on a television programme or the radio. These things are public and outsider tactics which we all can easily identify as part of activism, and they take place in the public sphere. However, at the other end, we have the quiet forms of activism, things like forming a self-help group, providing services in a community, things like craftivism, where you're making crafts and small objects or putting on theatre. These things are also public and private tactics, and there's a great range, almost too vast to cover in a video like this. What's important is that activists are really clear about why they're using public or outsider tactics. And by this we mean, what are they trying to do? To think about that, it can help to return to a stakeholder map and ask yourself, why are we engaging this stakeholder with this public or private tactic? Are we trying to maybe build their power within, change the way they see an issue or think about it? Are we trying to get this population group to network and build their power with, to form a community around a particular issue or problem? Are we trying to persuade a particular group or members of an organisation that they can act in the world, that they can use their power too, for example, to speak up about a perceived ill or problem or desired policy change? Or are we trying to engage people who already have power to affect change, to use that power, their power over, in pursuit of whatever ends or change that we want to see? The point really is to be really clear and not rush to public or outsider tactics, which can often be easier to engage in than private or insider ones, unless we know why we're doing it, what types of power we're trying to build or negate, and how we think that will contribute to our overall influencing strategy. Once we're clear about the objectives of our public or outsider tactics, we need to be equally as clear about the nature of the audiences we're trying to engage with them. That old adage that if you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one rings just as true in activism as in other fields. The good place to start with this, or a way to approach it, might be to think a bit more like a marketing executive and to profile your audience or the population group you're trying to reach. Here again, we're talking about the point of view of the other. But we don't want you to stereotype a member of that population group. Instead, we're looking for generalizations that are going to help us to design more nuanced and impactful public or outsider tactics. The kinds of things we might ask to create this stereotypical or typical member of the groups we're trying to reach is how old they are, their levels of income, their typical educational profile. We might also be interested in where they receive information, news for instance, or medical information that's important to them. We might look into the kinds of social and moral norms they normally adhere to. We might also look at who they listen to and who influences them. All of these types of questions can be really helpful for understanding who your audience is and designing those nuanced and targeted public or outsider tactics. When thinking about how we pick from the huge range of public or outsider tactics, a good place to start can be the Social Change Grid from the Social Change Project and the Sheila McKenzie Foundation. Broadly viewed, the tactics on the grid are split into the places in which they occur and how formal or informal they are in order to get them up and running. Broadly, those on the left-hand side of the grid are concentrated on building power within and power with. They include everything from community organising and service redesign to volunteering and neighbourhood councils. Those on the right-hand side of the grid are more focused on building power with and power to in terms of Rowland's 4 powers framework. They encompass everything from stunts and protests and social movements to petitions, citizens' jury, and targeted advocacy and lobbying. The tactics on the left and top right of the grid take place in claimed or created spaces, and those on the bottom right are all about engaging formal power holders, perhaps in the state or other organisations. But again, like all tools, this grid is just a guide, and it's a tool to get you thinking with, and it doesn't offer law-like propositions of what you should be doing. Every tactic is contingent on your analysis of the system that you're trying to change and the problems that you want to address. Outsider or public tactics that are designed to change the way an issue or problem is seen or even raise awareness about them often include an element of messaging or messages. A well-known acronym to guide activists when they're designing their messaging is SUCCESS, and the idea with this is to make those messages stick in people's heads. The acronym holds that simplicity is the key, that messages must be easy to understand and short, and make only a few points in them so as not to overload the audience with too many facts and figures. At the same time, messaging which surprises people juxtaposes interesting facts or images can often be particularly powerful and stay with people in their minds. As part of this, it's long been advised that activists use credible statistics or expert endorsements to add legitimacy to their messaging, but we're also increasingly understanding that without playing on emotions and appealing to deeper-seated human instincts, killer facts and messaging can often fall flat. In fact, we'll be talking a lot about this in later videos in storytelling and narratives. Lastly, if messaging can be wrapped up in a story that takes audiences on a journey from a perceived problem or issue to how it might be changed, that can be particularly powerful. Not always easy to do in a single poster or short soundbite, but again, we will be returning to storytelling and narratives in a later video. Impactful stunts, or as they're sometimes called, actions, can be particularly important for activists who are looking to engage a large number of people or particular audience. The key to a good stunt is to make them visible and a spectacle. The idea is to cut through and get attention, which is increasingly difficult in our hyper online videoed and photographed world. A stunt needs to be able to grab the attention of those in charge of editorial teams or influencers or those who create websites. Again, the principles from the last slide on making messages stick apply here. Stunts should not be ambiguous about their messages, and simplicity and killer facts can also really be helpful. But symbolism can play an even bigger role in impactful stunts and actions and help activists to paint a larger picture of an ongoing process or form of injustice, and also to tap into other kind of social and moral norms that may be prevalent within the complex system they're trying to change. The emotional impact of a stunt is also very important, and activists need to be clear about what they're trying to do with their stunts. Are they trying to elicit empathy? Are they trying to anger their audience, shock them, or maybe create a sense of hope that change can happen? The point here is to make people feel something, and that adage applies that people often remember how you made them feel rather than what you say. Lastly, it's increasingly realized that even in the most dire of situations, stunts that include an element of humor alongside the disruption that they might cause can be particularly impactful. A particular version of these types of stunts are called dilemma actions. The idea here is to force those who might oppose the kinds of changes you want to see, or who are oppressing a particular group, to react or respond to the stunt, and in doing so bring further attention to the issue or the problem, and also highlight some of the contradictions in their positions or the problems that they are contributing to. We're going to end our short exploration of public or outsider tactics, and particularly the analog versions of them, with a little bit on the mighty press release. We're going to do so acknowledging that legacy or traditional media is losing its influencing in many contexts. Nonetheless, the press release has for decades been a primary way for activists to reach large numbers of people, specifically by signalling and persuading editorial boards and journalists that they're up to something interesting and need to be listened to. To explore the press release, we turn to George Monbiot, a well-known environmental journalist in the UK and activist, and his notes on exploiting the press. George argues that journalists speak only one language, and that's their own. By this he means that in order to grab their attention, activists need to be able to speak in journalists' speak or language and their lexicons, and they need to be able to communicate in ways that it's very easy for journalists to take their press releases and turn them into longer articles, if not simply copying and pasting them. George's tips are a bit like before, to keep the press release short and pithy and have little ambiguity about the goals or objectives of the activists. He says the press releases also need to include the who, what, where, when and why and how of whatever it is they're describing. Maybe that might be a particular call to action, raising awareness about a particular issue and how it might be addressed, for example. George encourages activists to tell a story of change and at the same time provide information on the context. This is really important to give that sense of hope within a press release, even though it needs to be short. We'd also like to note here that it's generally the case that activists should still be spending time cultivating the personal relationships with journalists in order for their press release to land. This is because journalists, like everyone, are busy, and they have to sift through hundreds, if not thousands, of these things a week, and their personal relationship can help that press release to make its way to the top of the pile.